My name is Naomi Quinn, and I spent 17 years married to Michael, a man who guarded his secrets the way most people protect their money. Quietly, carefully, and without ever letting his grip loosen. When he was dying, lying there with his shaking hand wrapped in mine, his final words weren't about love, forgiveness, or saying goodbye. They were urgent, almost desperate. He whispered, "Promise me you'll never go to the old house in Blue Heron Ridge." I nodded through tears, my chest splitting open, and swore I would honor what he asked. For a long time I did exactly that. Years passed, and I held on to that promise. But grief changes things. It shifts how you see loyalty, how tightly you cling to the past. 3 years after Michael died, a lawyer called me in and handed over a small wooden box. Inside was an antique key, heavy in my palm, detailed and old, with a brass tag attached to it. One word was engraved on the tag, Ridge. Beneath the key lay a letter, written in Michael's unmistakable handwriting. It said, "The house is yours now. Go there once. See what I made for you. After that, decide what comes next." I was sitting in the office of Daniel Price, the attorney who had handled Michael's estate. His polished oak desk caught the glow of the late afternoon sun, and between us sat the letter and that weighty key. "Mrs. Quinn," Daniel said softly, "your husband bought an estate in Blue Heron Ridge about 4 years ago. He instructed me not to say a word about it until after his death." I barely processed what he was telling me. Michael had never once hinted at owning another property. We lived a comfortable, ordinary life. His engineering income, my job as a professor, nothing extravagant. The idea that he owned a second home, especially in a place like Blue Heron Ridge, felt unreal. Daniel went on, "That land is now extremely valuable. A development company called Summit Crest is building luxury villas nearby. They've already made offers worth millions." I rolled the key between my fingers, feeling its cold weight dig into my skin. Why would Michael hide something this big from me? And why would he spend his last breath begging me to stay away from it? Deep down, I knew the answers were waiting behind that gate in the mountains. 2 days later, I was driving along narrow, twisting mountain roads, the key sitting on the passenger seat beside me like it had its own presence. Tall pines pressed in from both sides, their shadows stretching across the pavement as the sun sank lower. With every mile I drove, my heart beat harder. When the GPS finally announced I had arrived, I slowed to a stop. In front of me stood a massive wrought iron gate anchored into stone pillars. Curved metal letters stretched across it, spelling out Blue Heron Ridge. I slid the key into the lock, and after a moment of resistance, the gate creaked open, slow and heavy, as if it didn't want to let me in. The sight beyond it stole my breath. This wasn't a cabin or a simple retreat. It was a sprawling estate built of stone and timber, surrounded by perfectly shaped gardens. A cobblestone path curved through manicured lawns, leading up to a wide porch where flowering vines climbed the wooden beams. Michael had always avoided talking about his childhood here, yet it was clear he had poured every part of himself into rebuilding this place. As I climbed the porch steps, my hand shook around the key. I unlocked the thick front door and stepped inside a hidden world my husband had created without ever telling me. The entry opened into a grand hall with vaulted ceilings and a stone fireplace so tall a person could stand inside it. But it wasn't the size or the craftsmanship that made me stop breathing. Every wall was covered in paintings, hundreds of them. Orchids filled every canvas, every color, every variety, petals captured in delicate detail, brushstrokes both strong and gentle at the same time. My throat tightened. Orchids had always been my passion. I talked about them constantly. I dreamed out loud about someday having a garden full of them. Michael always listened quietly. I never realized how deeply he was listening. In the center of the room sat a small oak table. On top of it was a closed silver laptop, and resting gently on the lid was a single white orchid. I reached toward it, but the sudden crunch of tires on gravel snapped me back. Through the tall windows, I saw a black sedan pull up outside. 3 men stepped out. They looked like Michael, because they were his brothers, and from the looks on their faces, they hadn't come to welcome me. I stood frozen, my hand hovering above the laptop. Outside, the men moved with the confidence of people who already believed the place belonged to them. Victor, the oldest, led the way. He was a grayer, harder version of Michael, his jaw clenched tight. Pierce followed close behind, sharp-eyed and carrying a leather briefcase. Noah, the youngest, hung back a step, quiet but alert. They climbed the porch and slammed their fists against the door. "Naomi!" Victor shouted. "We know you're in there. We need to talk about this house." I didn't answer. My pulse hammered in my ears. Michael had warned me that his family carried bitterness, though he never explained why. Standing there, watching their reflections in the side window, I finally understood. They weren't here out of love or loss. They were here for the land. land that had suddenly become worth millions. I ignored the pounding at the door and opened the laptop instead. The screen blinked to life and immediately asked for a password. My hands shook as I typed in the date Michael and I first met, then added the word hope. A second later, the screen unlocked. One folder appeared, plain and simple, labeled for Naomi. Inside were dozens of video files, each one stamped with a different date. My fingers trembled as I clicked the first video. Michael's face filled the screen. Not the pale, fragile version I remembered from the hospital, but the man I loved, healthy, bright-eyed, alive. "Hi, my love," he said, smiling that crooked smile that always made my chest tighten. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And you made it to Blue Heron Ridge. I knew you would." He paused, then continued softly. "I recorded these so you'd never feel alone. Not now. Not ever." He took a steady breath, his gaze calm and direct. "There are things I never told you. 3 years ago, the doctors found a brain aneurysm. They said I had time, but not a lot of it. I didn't want you or Sophie living every day under the weight of that fear. So instead, I spent that time building something here. Something meant just for you." Tears blurred my vision. Even now, even after death, Michael was still explaining himself, still trying to shield me. Then his voice shifted, growing serious. "One warning, Naomi. My brothers will come. They've always believed this house belongs to them. Do not trust them." The video froze as another hard knock shook the front door. "Naomi!" Victor shouted again. "This is family business. Open the door before we take this to court." I hit pause and wiped my eyes, forcing air into my lungs. Through the window I saw Pierce holding a stack of papers, waving them like a threat. Noah stood beside him, arms crossed, watching silently with cold eyes. Michael's words echoed in my head. "Don't trust them." I pulled the laptop close to my chest. If answers existed, they were here inside this house, not outside with 3 men who suddenly cared about property they'd ignored for decades. The pounding grew louder. "You're only making this harder for yourself," Victor yelled. "The courts will side with us." Just as panic started creeping in, Michael's calm voice seemed to return in my mind. "I planned for this. Look in the drawer beneath the table. You'll find what you need." I opened the drawer. Inside was a thick blue folder, its edges worn from use. On the front, in Michael's handwriting, was a single word. Proof. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Through the side window, I saw Victor step back, his phone pressed to his ear. Minutes later, sirens echoed up the gravel road. A patrol car pulled in behind their sedan, and a young deputy stepped out, adjusting his hat. "Mrs. Quinn," he called toward the house. "I have paperwork requesting inspection of the property due to a contested inheritance claim." My chest tightened, but I remembered Michael's instructions. I carried the blue folder to the door and opened it. Inside were neatly arranged documents. Deeds, notarized signatures, bank records, clear evidence that the property had been legally purchased years ago. The deputy scanned the papers, his expression changing. He turned to the brothers. "This documentation appears valid. If you wish to dispute ownership, it'll need to be handled in civil court. Not here, not today." Victor's face turned red, but he stayed silent. After a long moment, the brothers stepped back, casting angry looks at the house before finally leaving. For the first time all day, I felt a small sense of control return. Once the patrol car disappeared down the drive, the silence around the estate felt heavier than before. My eyes drifted toward a glass structure at the edge of the garden. Curious, I crossed the lawn and opened the greenhouse door. Warm, humid air wrapped around me, thick with the scent of earth and blossoms. Orchids stretched as far as I could see, rare hybrids, fragile species I'd only ever read about in books. At the center stood a vivid blue orchid, glowing softly in the filtered light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a woman's voice said. I turned quickly. A woman in her 40s stood nearby, holding a spray bottle. She wore worn work clothes, her expression calm and steady. "I'm Teresa Park," she said. "Michael hired me to care for the orchids and watch over the property if anything ever happened to him." My chest tightened. Even in secrecy, Michael had made sure this place was protected. He hadn't just built a refuge, he'd surrounded it with people he trusted. Teresa set the bottle down and motioned for me to follow her. We walked across the garden to an old tool shed, its roof sagging and boards rough with age. "Your husband was careful," she said. "After his brothers started poking around last year, he became even more cautious." Inside, the shed smelled of soil and rust. Teresa moved to the back corner, pushed aside a stack of boxes, and revealed a heavy trapdoor set into the concrete floor. She pulled an iron key from her pocket and unlocked it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. My heart raced as we stepped down. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered before snapping fully on. This wasn't a cellar or some forgotten basement. It was a command center. The walls were covered in maps, detailed surveys of Blue Heron Ridge and the surrounding land. Red circles marked key areas, each labeled with notes like Phase 2 expansion and golf course corridor. On a long steel table sat thick binders, overflowing with receipts, printed emails, and sworn affidavits. This was his war room, Teresa said quietly. Michael had uncovered Summit Crest's secret development plans. Along the way, he'd also gathered proof of his brother's financial crimes. He wanted you to have all of this, Naomi, she added. He knew there would come a day when you'd have to fight. As I stood there, surrounded by maps and evidence, my phone vibrated in my pocket. One glance at the caller ID made my stomach sink. Sophie. Mom, she said the moment I answered, her voice tight and uneasy. Why didn't you tell me Dad owned property up here? Uncle Victor already called me. He says you're confused, that we could split the inheritance if I help him challenge the will. He wants me to meet them tomorrow. What's going on? The ache in my chest deepened. They had already gone after her. Listen to me, Sophie, I said, keeping my voice firm. Do not sign anything. Don't meet them alone. This isn't about being fair. This is about honoring your father's wishes. She exhaled sharply. If money's involved, don't I deserve to know the truth? You will, I promised, forcing calm into my tone. But right now, you need to trust me. When the call ended, I looked down at Michael's files spread across the table. His warning was unfolding exactly as he'd feared. Their plan wasn't just to pressure me. They were willing to use my daughter, too. The next afternoon, I met Sophie at a quiet cafe tucked away on a side street in Silver Ridge. She slid into the booth across from me, arms crossed, her expression guarded. Mom, I don't have much time, she said. Victor's hosting a dinner tonight with some investors. He thinks I should hear them out. I pulled a tablet from my bag and placed it between us. Before you do anything, I want you to watch this. She hesitated, then leaned closer as I opened a file labeled for Sophie. Michael's face appeared on the screen. Strong, healthy, familiar. Hey, sweetheart, he said warmly. If you're seeing this, I'm not there to explain things myself, but you deserve the truth. Years ago, your uncle stole my share of the family inheritance using forged documents. When I threatened to expose them, they tried to destroy me. I walked away and built a new life. They never changed. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Michael's voice softened. Don't let them turn loyalty into greed. Family isn't about blood. It's about who protects your heart. Sophie wiped her cheeks, her voice steadier now. So what do we do, Mom? We can't let them take everything Dad worked for. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We don't fight the way they expect us to. We fight on our terms. That evening, back at Blue Heron Ridge, we spread Michael's blue folder across the dining table. Deeds, notarized transfers, bank statements, solid, airtight proof. Alongside them, the binders from the bunker laid out years of financial manipulation and shady deals tied to Victor, Pierce, and Noah. I called Daniel Price and explained everything. He listened carefully before saying, You have more leverage than you realize. We'll prepare for both a civil challenge and a negotiation. With Teresa's help, we transformed the Great Hall into a boardroom. Long table, projector, neatly organized stacks of documents. Michael had left everything ready, just waiting to be used. Finally, I reached out to Evan Carr, the CEO of Summit Crest. He didn't yet realize that the one piece of land his entire expansion depended on now belonged to me. Michael always said the best defense was thinking 3 steps ahead. Now, it was my turn to prove he was right. The brothers arrived at exactly 10 the next morning, their black sedan crunching up the gravel drive. This time, they weren't alone. A man in a tailored suit followed them, briefcase in hand, clearly a hired advisor. Mrs. Quinn, Victor said smoothly when I opened the door, we're here to resolve this peacefully. No reason to involve the courts. I led them into the dining hall. Sophie sat beside me, Michael's old watch shining on her wrist. Papers were stacked neatly at every seat, and the projector hummed softly. Victor launched into his proposal, suggesting the property be divided into equal shares. He casually dismissed the Western Acres as useless land. I clicked the remote. A map lit up the screen, overlaying Blue Heron Ridge with Summit Crest's planned expansion. The so-called useless acres aligned perfectly with the future golf course corridor. The advisor frowned, shifting in his chair. This changes things, he muttered. At that moment, the side door opened. Evan Carr walked in, followed closely by my attorney. Victor's practiced smile finally cracked. If this goes to court, Pierce snapped, every page becomes public. He looked rattled now. Noah wouldn't even meet my eyes, turning his head away instead. That's when Sophie spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and stronger than I'd ever heard it. You already stole from my father once, she said. You're not doing it again." I looked at each of them in turn. Withdraw the challenge, end the threats, walk away now, or deal with the consequences. The silence that followed felt heavier than stone. For the first time, I saw fear replace the arrogance that had always defined them. Moments later, the brothers stormed out, their advisor hurrying behind them. Evan Carr stayed seated. He studied me carefully, then shifted his gaze to the map still glowing on the projector. "You're holding the linchpin of our entire project," he said evenly. "If you refuse to sell, everything collapses. So tell me, what do you want?" I took a slow, measured breath. "Not money, protection. The land stays whole. The greenhouse and the studio Michael built remain untouched. I'll lease a portion that doesn't damage the ridge. The rest becomes protected conservation land." Evan tilted his head slightly. "And in return," I continued, "you fund a community endowment. The orchid collection becomes part of an open art and healing program for anyone who needs a place to breathe again." He was quiet for a long moment. Then a small smile crossed his face. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, "you're not asking for profit. You're asking for stewardship. I can respect that." The next morning, I explored the east wing of the house, an area I hadn't been ready to face before. At the end of a long hallway, double oak doors opened into a room filled with warm, golden light. It was a studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ridge outside, while shelves lined with brushes, paints, and blank canvases surrounded the space. Against one wall stood a tall cabinet. Inside were my old college paintings, the ones I thought had been lost years ago when we moved. Michael had saved every single one. In the center of the room stood a large canvas wrapped in brown paper. Written across it, in Michael's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For when you're ready." I pressed my hand to my mouth as tears filled my eyes. Michael hadn't just left me a house or a garden. He'd left me a path back to myself, the part of me I'd buried under grief and responsibility. I unwrapped the canvas, set it on the easel, and dipped a brush into paint. That first stroke felt like breathing again after being underwater for years. The days that followed found a rhythm I hadn't expected. Each morning, Sophie and I brewed coffee and watched one of Michael's recorded messages. Some were practical, notes about accounts and repairs. Others were gentle and personal, filled with stories he'd never shared while he was alive. Afternoons were spent with Daniel finalizing contracts or walking the land with Summit Crest surveyors, marking conservation boundaries. Evenings belonged to the studio. I painted until the sun disappeared behind the ridge, color after color spilling across the canvases. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, waiting. One evening, just as dusk settled in, I heard tires crunch on gravel. I looked out the window and froze. It wasn't the brothers' sedan. It was Victor, alone. He stepped out slowly, shoulders slumped, the sharp edge gone from his posture. When I opened the door, he didn't argue or demand. He simply held out a small photograph. It showed 3 boys beneath a cottonwood tree, Victor, Pierce, and Michael as children. In Michael's hands was a tiny orchid plant, his grin wide and proud. "I found this in our father's desk," Victor said quietly. "I thought you should have it. I was wrong about a lot of things." For the first time, his eyes softened. And for the first time, I believed him. Weeks later, after the contracts were signed and the house no longer felt like a secret, but truly like home, I discovered one final video hidden deep on the laptop. Michael's face appeared calm and steady. "Naomi, if you're watching this, then you did exactly what I hoped. You protected Blue Heron Ridge and yourself. But remember, the house, the orchids, the studio, they're not the legacy. The real legacy is choice. The choice to love, to build, to keep creating even when life tries to take everything away." I paused the video, staring at his frozen smile. In the studio, a new canvas waited. I painted a woman and her daughter standing together on the ridge, with a man behind them offering a single blue orchid. Michael was gone, but in every brushstroke, he was still with us. Looking back now, I understand that Michael's true gift wasn't the house or the land. It was the reminder that real strength is quiet, steady, and often born in silence. That family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty. And that protecting what matters doesn't always mean fighting louder. It means standing firmer. Legacy isn't measured in money. It's measured in love carried forward. If this story meant something to you, let it remind you to protect the people and places that give your life meaning. Tap like so others can find it too, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from.